All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on fine print tonight, and this is the big political story from India, where the central government has now constituted a committee to explore the feasibility of this interesting concept of one nation, one election. But remember, India is an enormous nation. Now, the panel is to be headed by the former President Ramnath Kovind, and reports say that the former president is expected to speak with experts on this issue. Interestingly, he's also likely to consult with leaders from different political parties across the spectrum. Now, the government's decision has come just a day after it decided to call for a special session of the parliament between the 18th till the 22nd of September. And what's also interesting is that the agenda for this special session that's been convened is under wraps. Now, this was the news. Let's take a look at the fine print. Now, let's make it clear. The idea of one nation, one election does not mean holding just one election per se. Rather, in the present context, it means holding simultaneous elections to all state assemblies and the Lok Sabha together. Now, the present Bharatiya Janata Party-led government has been pushing for this cause ever since it came to power back in 2014. Now, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself has on different occasions since 2016 made the case for holding simultaneous elections. So let's try and first understand why there is a need to hold simultaneous elections.
हम 52 से लेकर के आज तक लगातार चुनाव में रिफॉर्म होते ही रहे और होते रहने चाहिए, और मैं मानता हूं इसकी चर्चा भी लगातार होती रहनी चाहिए। उसके अंदर खुले मन से चर्चा होनी चाहिए, बंधे मन से होने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है। लेकिन आउटराइट ये कह देना कि एक देश एक चुनाव के हम पक्ष में नहीं है, अरे चर्चा तो करो भाई।
Now, it is a widely known fact that India is almost always in election mode. Every year, the nation also holds elections for 5 to 7 state assemblies. That happens pretty much every year. Add to that a general election that happens every 5 years, and elections to local governments at regular intervals. Conducting frequent elections engages a lot of resources, right from resources of conducting elections to resources for campaigning and providing security for these elections. Frequent elections also hinders the process of governance and policy making, as the model code of conduct is frequently in place in some part of the nation. Holding simultaneous elections will, of course, save all of these resources and efforts. So there is a strong case for holding simultaneous elections for state assemblies and the Lok Sabha. This is at least the case which the government is making. Do note here that this has been a political reality in India from the years 1952 till 1966, after which some state assemblies were dissolved, leading to early elections in those states. Hence, the cycle, of course, went out of sync. Now, going back to such a case today is not going to be an easy task. Many would, of course, question the practicality of it. The exercise also has many constitutional, statutory and political hurdles. First, it involves holding elections to a few states early and then delaying elections for the rest, while the state assemblies could, of course, be dissolved earlier than their prescribed tenure of 5 years. Doing so is going to be extremely challenging if the state is ruled by a party which is in the opposition at the centre. Plus, there is no constitutional provision to extend the tenure of any state assembly or the Lok Sabha. So going back to simultaneous elections will require constitutional amendments and changes in the Representation of People's Acts. Now, such amendments will have to be approved by a two-thirds majority in both houses of the parliament and by ratification of more than half of the state assemblies. If the present government is successful in bringing the necessary amendments, then this, of course, remember, will not be any kind of guarantee that the cycle of elections happening simultaneously will not go out of sync again. To ensure otherwise, more amendments will be needed, especially with respect to no-confidence motions, President's rule in states, anti-defection law and by-election rules. Also, let's not forget that all of such amendments will need to pass judicial scrutiny as well. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what this one nation, one election concept actually means and can it practically be played out, we're being joined by Mr. Dilip Cherian, who's a political campaign advisor, is joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Mr. Cherian, this is, as a principle, it sounds a very interesting concept, one nation, one election. But given the enormous size of India and also the logistical nightmare it may prove to be, do you think, firstly, let's start with, is it even a practical suggestion?
It's difficult, in my view, to make sure that 1.4 billion people who are in this country express their electoral voice at the same time on two completely different governments, a central government and a state government. It's difficult, but is it logistically possible? I believe the answer is yes. It is logistically possible if planning can begin, and it may take a little time, but I think that's possibly what they want to initiate.
All right, now, but this is something that used to happen between the years 1952 till 1966, and then you also have this very practical things that need to be taken into consideration. There are places where there could be a hung assembly, there are places where governments could not be formed or governments get dissolved, no confidence motions could come into play. How is it even, just to wrap our minds around it, even if we get a simultaneous election held both at the state level and at the central level, the fact that the elections can again go out of sync is a very real possibility, and then the entire exercise will have to be done again.
As someone who advises a lot of political parties, I straw polled a bunch of them on what the implications are. And I think the issues you're talking about are relevant. The biggest issue, of course, is to make sure that, these elections maintain that cycle, and what happens if one or two states fall out of line, and then it just has a cascading effect over the years. But more important is the fact that constitutional experts recognize that it will take 4 or 5 mega amendments in the Constitution to make this feasible. You have to have some kind of consensus of that. I know for certain that this is possibly the reason why there has been this caution expressed already by the government that in this special session, they want open, free, and frank discussion. But what if this is a red herring? Is this the only thing that a special, session is being held for? Or does the government have a bunch of other things that they want to push through at the same time? That's the question that is now hanging before lawyers, political party leaders, and politicians of all hues.
Absolutely, indeed. My final quick question to you, Mr. Cherian, is this. Now, having one election for a nation, just one overarching election, simultaneously, the criticism is that it favors the bigger parties. But India, as vast and as diverse as it is, we have so many of these smaller parties, issues that are so localized. Do you think we have this one nation, one election sort of a system where there is one election in a period of 5 years? The smaller, the local, regional issues that people would want to be spoken about would somehow not actually be heard on the national level?
That's a big worry that a lot of people, especially citizens in other parts of the country, are bound to express. If this does happen, it is actually changing the very nature of a federal nation. It is changing the very constitution of the way the country is put together. It's not just a constitutional amendment, it's a complete rethinking. And the world will have to begin to look at India, and India will have to present itself as a different country from what it is today, where it is actually a republic of states, which is coming together for certain things, but voting in different ways, different niches, different cultures, different subcultures, and that's a big, big issue.
I think that's something that the government will have to ponder upon. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cherian, for joining us and getting us all those insights there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.